discuss the two.
I move Amendment 5 in my name and that of my colleagues. Look, Minister, this is a very simple, self-explanatory amendment that we're putting down. And it's a sunset clause in relation to the legislation that's before us, that it can only remain in operation until 12 months after its publication. As you know, you've waived pre-legislative scrutiny. Unfortunately, it was done so through a vote at committee, which I don't think is good practice. We are waiving the existing provisions that are there in terms of licensing, which I think is a bit hypocritical for diesel-powered electricity generation on sites where we wanted to have a biomass plant generating electricity. And I know that the communities in the Midlands feel quite aggrieved in relation to the approach that's now been taken in relation to this. But having said that, particularly as I made the point last night, we were talking about two power plants that had a 10-year lifespan remaining in both of them, which could burn without adaptation 100% biomass, and replacing one of those plants now with diesel generation. And while you will come back and you'll argue, well, the two sites have now been designated for this, there is the wriggle room there within the drafting of it that an alternative site could be looked at some future date over the coming period of time, or that you will come back with an amendment to extend the remit of this particular provision. And we've seen this very much in relation to the COVID legislation and the COVID regulations. As you know, at the time, I tabled a sunset clause to that legislation. Thankfully, the government agreed to it, and thankfully they did, because it would have usurped the democratic process had that not happened, and it did force government to come back in here and justify on numerous occasions why they were extending it. And if it is the case that this does have to be extended beyond the sites in Tarbert and in Shannon Bridge, that you should and must come back in here to the House and justify that. And because of that, I think it is a sensible approach to have this particular sunset clause in it, and I hope you can accept this amendment.
Anything else? Minister?
No, I'm afraid I can't, but for the primary reason is that we do already have a sunset clause. The Airgrid Electricity and Turf Amendment Act 2022, which published last year, has such a clause saying the project will cease operation in 2027 with an option of a further year if required, but only if a resolution is passed by both houses. And the purpose of that legislation was to provide this capacity will remain only available until the necessary replacement capacity has been secured. But it's absolutely cast iron. This is time limited. There's no question about it. And with regard to location or alternative locations, again, this does not apply in any other location. There are only two projects in Shannon Bridge and Tarbert which were put forward for planning assessment by Bord Pleanála. If either of those projects fail for any reason, it's unlikely, hopefully, but then an alternative site would not be found in time and brought to a similar level of planning compliance for winter 23-24, given the site timeframes. And just broadly, if I can, to the Deputy's point about process here, I accept and agree. It's very unfortunate, and it wasn't my intention to disrespect either the committee or others with having a third set of legislation. As I said yesterday, I would prefer it if we didn't have to do this legislative measure. It was only after final legal advice that all other avenues and options we looked at weren't available that we realised we did have to do it this way. But there's clear sunset provisions in the 22 Act which mean that it will not continue beyond the dates set out in that.
And then the 6th is maybe you want to comment on that, no?
Yeah, just picking up from where my colleague left off, Deputy Whitmore, we're being told this is an emergency measure. If it's an emergency measure, then there should be a sunset clause in it, full stop. We are waiving the environmental laws in this country to facilitate this. This should be a once-off. And the only way we can ensure that this is a once-off is if there is a sunset clause put into it. Now, I'd like to know, Minister, what's winter 2023-2024? Is it the calendar in relation to the 1st of February being spring? Is it the meteorological spring of the 1st of March? Or is it the one that's in statute, which is the fuel allowance, which is April of 2024? Because the reality is, despite what you are telling us here, you could, if either Tarbert or Shannon Bridge were knocked back, you have time up until April of next year to put forward another site. So don't tell us that that is not the case. And in fact, having engaged with the officials that I respect in relation to this, they, when I put that very point to them, did not deny that that is the case. So you're telling the House here one story. We are being told a different story when we actually put these specific questions. So what is the definition of winter 2023-2024, if you're so sure in relation to it? Because I don't know what that is. Secondly, if it is only to deal with the pressure next winter, then put in your sunset clause. This is putting a coach and four through the existing environmental laws in this country. You have made a strong justification as to why that should happen. If it's an emergency law, there should be a sunset clause to it, because we all know that we have seen in the past where legislation remains on the statute books and all of a sudden this rabbit is pulled out of a hat in 10 years' time. Oh, we actually have legislation there that can deal with this, Minister, and we just need to make a small little typographical change to it. And the Minister of the day will come in here, the Minister for the Environment of the day, and say, look, this is already on the statute. This was agreed after long debate in the House back 10 years ago, back in 2023. This was put on the statute books. There wasn't a sunset clause put into it, and all we need to do is to make a typographical change in relation to the other piece of legislation that we're referring to, and they bring forward a single sentence amendment to the legislation, and here we are back to square one again. Put in a sunset clause if it's an emergency. If it's not an emergency, then go through the proper statutory process in enacting this legislation.
No, there's no prospect of any other sites being used. The 222 Act is very precise and clear as to what designation or designation development is. It's in relation to intended to be located at two separate sites at Shannon Bridge and Tarbert generation stations. So it isn't possible for alternative sites. And the definition of winter, legally, courts obviously have to interpret any particular provision, but I believe any assessment of any court, winter, be from the whatever the various definitions you put it there, will be seen as appropriate. We can't stop in 24 because it actually goes on for several more winters, because we are at shortfall in that period, the next, not just next winter, but 2 to 3 winters after that, and that's why we're providing for it. But we absolutely have a sunset clause. It's set out clearly in the legislation, and okay. But my officials have right to point out, it does allow for potential of alternative sites, but we have 450 already on those two particular sites, and that is also set out as designated development, so it will not extend to beyond those two initial ones, and we do need them quickly.
Look, Minister, you're coming in here and you're twisting and turning, in fairness. Like you said, it's only 2 designated sites and no others. Then, as it has been brought to your attention, which was brought to our attention when we asked these very questions during the week. Now, we have not had a lot of time to deal with it, but if we're asking very simple, basic questions, and when we're putting the same questions to you, we're getting a different answer here. Now, I've asked you, what's the definition of winter? And you haven't given me an answer in relation to it, because we don't know what winter is, and it will be down to an interpretation. And you are telling me here now that if one of these two sites is shot down, for whatever reason, one of these two sites is shot down, that this legislation cannot be invoked. It can be invoked, Minister, and we have been told that it can be invoked. And the reality is that winter finishes in April, because it's about energy demand. And any interpretation that would be taken by the courts, if the fuel allowance is paid into April, you can very legitimately make the argument that winter, from an energy demand point of view, continues into April. And we're talking about a 14-month window here in relation to that. And you're honestly telling me here and now that if one of these sites gets shot down, that another site cannot be put forward within the next 14 months. That is not the case, Minister, and that's why we need the sunset clause.
The reason for this Emergency Generator Act is to make sure we do have power available for next winter. If we don't get this passed and get it through and get the EPA starting that licensing process, that won't be possible. For these two stations and the plants that are planned, whatever about others, another process starting would be another 12 months at least. We would, because we've seen from experience, even using emergency legislation, how detailed and how much time it does take to get still due process and make sure everything is correct. So we will not be able to switch easily. We have two sites that we believe are appropriate. We have the power equipment and we have the gas connection and the distillate connection and all the other surrounding transformer and other equipment. But that took 8 months, 9 months already. We've been at that. If we were to start again, we'd be starting another process, and this legislation would not help us or would not apply. We'd be into a completely different situation, and we would be. So this is applied to these two plants in these two locations. We believe we can do it in time, but the time is so tight that if we were to start again, any other application wouldn't come in within time.